The massive chamber was silent except for the soft hum of the translation devices. Hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy sat in their floating seats, waiting. Their eyes were fixed on the lone figure standing in the center of the room. Commander Kethver of the Zephyrian Empire stood on shaking legs, his purple scales darker than usual with fear and stress. Kethver had 4 arms, each ending in clawed hands that trembled as he held the speaking device. His large black eyes darted around the room, looking at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds. Some had tentacles, others had fur, and a few were made of what looked like living crystal. But they all shared one thing in common. They were all afraid of the same enemy, the humans. "Honorable members of the Galactic War Council," Kethver began, his voice cracking through the translator. "I stand before you today to tell you about the greatest mistake in Zephyrian military history. I am here to warn you about a species that should never have been awakened. A species that fights like no other in the known galaxy." He paused, his breathing heavy. Several council members leaned forward in their seats. The Zephyrian Empire was known across the galaxy for its military might. Their soldiers were feared on 100 worlds. If something had frightened them this badly, every species in the council needed to know about it. 3 cycles ago, our intelligence division discovered a small blue and green planet in the outer rim of the galaxy. The world was called Earth by its inhabitants. Our scouts reported that the beings living there had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They used primitive rocket ships powered by chemical fuel. Their weapons were simple. They threw metal projectiles using explosive powder. Compared to our plasma cannons and energy shields, they seemed like children playing with sticks. Kethver's voice grew stronger as he remembered those early days. The Dominion High Command was pleased. Here was an easy conquest. A world rich in resources, defended by primitives who could barely leave their own solar system. The plan was simple: show up with our fleet, demand surrender, and add another world to our empire. We expected the humans to bow down within hours of our arrival. The commander's scales flickered from purple to a sickly green color as his emotions changed. I was second in command of the invasion fleet. 1,200 ships, all equipped with the finest weapons the Dominion could build. Our plasma cannons could melt through solid rock. Our energy shields could stop anything these humans might throw at us. We had soldiers trained on 50 different worlds, veterans of campaigns across the galaxy. He stopped talking for a moment and stared at the floor. When he looked up again, his eyes were wide with remembered terror. The first sign that something was wrong came when we entered their solar system. Our long-range sensors detected movement near the 4th planet from their sun. A red world they called Mars. There were human ships there, but they were not running away. They were moving toward us. Our fleet commander, General Vexter, laughed at this. He said the humans were either very brave or very stupid. Either way, it would make the conquest easier if they came to us instead of hiding on their planet. He ordered the fleet to continue toward their home world, brushing aside the small human force like insects. Kethver's 4 hands clenched into fists. The human fleet was tiny compared to ours, maybe 60 ships at most. Their largest vessel was smaller than our smallest destroyer. They looked like they were built from scraps of metal welded together. No energy shields that we could detect, no plasma weapons. Just crude chemical rockets and kinetic weapons that fired solid projectiles. The chamber was completely quiet now. Every being present was hanging on Kethver's words. The human commander sent us a message. His name was Admiral Jake Morrison, and he spoke from a ship called the UES Defiance. The message was short and simple. He said, "Turn back now or face the consequences." That was all. No threats about their mighty fleet, no demands for negotiation. Just a simple warning delivered in a calm voice. Kethver's scales shifted to a deep red color, showing his anger and shame. General Vexter ordered the communications officer to reply. He told the humans that they had one chance to surrender before the Dominion fleet destroyed every ship in their pathetic little force. The human admiral's response came back immediately. 3 words, then we fight. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. The human ships did not charge at us in a glorious but useless attack. They did not try to retreat to safety. Instead, they did something I had never seen in 40 years of military service. They spread out in a pattern that made no sense to our tactical computers. The commander paused and looked around the chamber. Our weapons officers locked onto the largest human ship and fired. Plasma bolts that could melt through a mountain struck the vessel dead center. But instead of exploding or surrendering, something impossible happened. The human ship absorbed the hit and kept coming. Their hull was damaged, but they were still fighting. That was when we learned our first lesson about human engineering. Their ships were not built like ours. We make our vessels strong by using energy shields and advanced materials. The humans built their ships to survive damage by making them redundant. When we destroyed one section, 3 other sections could do the same job. When we breached their hull in one place, automatic systems sealed the damage and kept the ship running. Kethver's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the real shock came when the humans fired back. We expected their primitive kinetic weapons to bounce off our energy shields like rain hitting a window. Instead, their projectiles punched right through our defenses like they were not even there. The first Dominion ship to die was the destroyer Sekmar. The humans fired something called a railgun, which used magnetic fields to accelerate a solid projectile to incredible speeds. The metal slug hit our ship with the force of a small asteroid. It went through our shield, through our armor, and out the other side. The Sekmar broke in half and exploded in a ball of fire. The chamber erupted in shocked gasps and clicking sounds as the various species expressed their disbelief. Kethver waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The humans called their weapons primitive, but they were deadly in ways we had never imagined. While we focused on making more powerful energy weapons, they had perfected the art of throwing things very, very hard. Their railguns could fire projectiles faster than our sensors could track. Their missile systems could carry dozens of warheads that split apart and hit multiple targets at once. But the worst part was not their weapons. It was how they used them. The humans did not fight like any civilized species. They did not target our command ships first or try to disable our fleet in an organized way. Instead, they seemed to know exactly where to hit us to cause the most damage with the least effort. Kethver's voice became hollow and distant. Admiral Morrison's ship, the Defiance, fired a single missile at our flagship. Just one missile compared to the hundreds of plasma bolts we had fired at them. But this missile was different. It carried something they called a nuclear warhead. When it exploded next to our command ship, the entire vessel simply vanished in a ball of light brighter than a star. General Vexter died instantly, along with 3,000 of our finest soldiers. But the humans were not finished with us. As our fleet tried to reorganize after losing our commander, they showed us something that still gives me nightmares. They showed us that they were not just good at building weapons. They were good at using them in ways that would make any sane being run in terror. The purple-scaled commander looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the stars beyond. That was just the beginning of the longest day of my life. The day I learned that humans do not just fight wars. They turn war itself into an art form. Kethver's breathing became heavy as he prepared to continue his testimony. The memories of what happened next still haunted his dreams. He could see the concern in the eyes of the council members as they waited for him to speak again. Some of them had started taking notes while others simply stared at him with growing fear. After our flagship was destroyed, chaos spread through our fleet like a disease. Kethver continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly could not coordinate their attacks. Our communication systems were damaged, and our chain of command was broken. We should have retreated right then. Any sensible military force would have pulled back to regroup and plan a new attack. The commander's scales shifted to a darker shade of purple, but the humans did not give us that chance. They pressed their attack immediately, like predators, sensing wounded prey. This was when I first witnessed the tactical genius of Captain Lisa Rodriguez. He paused, closing his large black eyes as if trying to block out the memory. Captain Rodriguez commanded a human destroyer called the U's Vengeance. Her ship was smaller than our escort vessels, but she wielded it like a master swordsman uses a blade. While our remaining ships tried to form a defensive formation, she attacked us from an angle that should have been impossible. Human ships, we learned, do not follow the same rules of physics that govern our vessels. Our ships need time to change direction because of their size and the way our engines work. Human ships can spin and twist and change course in ways that make no sense. Rodriguez used this advantage to strike at us from directions we could not predict. Kethver opened his eyes and looked directly at the council members. The first thing Rodriguez did was launch something our computers could not identify. The projectiles were moving too fast for our sensors to get a clear reading, but they were heading straight for our heavy cruiser Morduk, Captain Zethri of. The Morduk ordered his crew to activate their energy shields at full power. The missiles hit our shields and seemed to disappear for a moment. Captain Zethri started to celebrate, thinking our defenses had worked. Then the nuclear explosions began. The chamber filled with gasps and clicking sounds from various species. Nuclear weapons were considered barbaric by most civilized races, used only as a last resort by the most desperate fighters. The humans had somehow designed their missiles to penetrate our energy shields before exploding. The nuclear blasts did not just damage the Morduk. They completely destroyed it. 3,000 Zephyrian soldiers died in seconds, their bodies turned to vapor by the heat. But Captain Rodriguez was not finished with us. Kethver's four hands began to shake again as he remembered what happened next. Our battle computers calculated that Rodriguez's ship had taken critical damage from our return fire. Her engines were failing, her weapon systems were offline, and her life support was running out of power. Any reasonable commander would have ordered an evacuation and tried to save as many crew members as possible. But humans are not reasonable. Instead of evacuating, Rodriguez ordered her crew to abandon ship while she stayed behind. I watched on our sensors as escape pods launched from the Vengeance, carrying her soldiers to safety. Then Rodriguez did. Something that still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. The commander's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She pointed her dying ship directly at our cruiser Valkyran and activated her engines at maximum power. The Vengeance was moving so fast that our defensive weapons could not track it. Rodriguez was using her entire ship as a guided missile, and she was piloting it personally. Captain Mortel of the Valkyran tried to move his ship out of the way, but it was too late. The human destroyer struck us at full speed, and both ships exploded in a fireball that could be seen from 3 star systems away. But the explosion was not the worst part. Kethver stopped talking and stared at the floor. For a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a terror that made several council members lean back in their seats. The worst part was Rodriguez's final transmission. As her ship was about to impact ours, she sent a message on all frequencies. Her voice was calm and steady, like she was discussing the weather. She said, "For Earth and her children, tell my family I love them." Then she died, taking 800 of our soldiers with her. I thought the other human ships would be demoralized by losing their captain. In every military force I had ever fought, the death of a respected leader causes fear and confusion. Soldiers start thinking about survival instead of victory. But the humans did the opposite. The commander's scales turned almost black with remembered horror. Instead of becoming afraid, the remaining human ships became more aggressive. It was like Rodriguez's sacrifice had filled them with a terrible purpose. They stopped trying to disable our ships and started trying to destroy us completely. Lieutenant Commander Brad Collins of the UES Thunder began using tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. His ship was equipped with industrial mining equipment, tools designed to cut through asteroids and extract valuable minerals. Collins turned these tools into weapons of terror. Kethver's voice became hollow and distant. Collins would use his mining lasers to slowly cut through our hull armor, creating deliberate breaches that took minutes instead of seconds. Our soldiers trapped inside those ships could only wait and watch as the laser beam moved closer to them. The worst part was that Collins broadcast the screams of our dying crews on all communication channels. He wanted us to hear our friends and comrades begging for mercy as they died. He wanted us to know that he was killing them slowly on purpose. This was not the quick death of an energy weapon or explosion. This was torture disguised as combat tactics. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed quieter, as if they were afraid to make noise. But Collins saved his most horrible trick for last. After cutting open a ship's hull, he would use his mining equipment to flood the damaged areas with toxic gases, used for asteroid processing. Our soldiers would die slowly, choking on poisons that burned their lungs and skin. Some of them took hours to die. Kethvar's voice cracked with emotion. I tried to contact Collins directly to ask him to stop the torture and fight with honor. His response was transmitted on all frequencies so every ship in both fleets could hear it. He said, "Honor is for people who have the luxury of choice. We're fighting for our survival, and we'll use every tool we have." That was when I began to understand something terrible about humans. They do not fight wars the way other species do. For most civilized races, war is about conquering territory or resources or achieving political goals. For humans, war is personal. When you attack them, you are not just threatening their government or their military. You are threatening their families, their children, their entire way of life. The commander looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many council members as he could. This makes them incredibly dangerous because they are willing to do things that would horrify any sane being. They will sacrifice themselves to protect others. They will use any weapon, no matter how terrible, if it gives them an advantage. Most importantly, they will never surrender as long as there is any chance of protecting the people they love. Rodriguez died to save her crew and damage our fleet. Collins tortured our soldiers to break our morale and make us afraid. Both of them were following the same human philosophy: victory at any cost. They turned every tool, every weapon, every tactic into an instrument of terror designed to make us give up and go home. Kethvar's scales flickered between purple and green as his emotions shifted, and the most frightening thing of all was that their tactics were working. After only a few hours of combat, our remaining ships were too afraid to get close to the human vessels. We had superior numbers, better weapons, and more advanced technology. But the humans had something we could not match: the absolute determination to win, no matter what it cost them. Kethvar paused for a moment and drank from a small container of liquid that helped calm his nerves. The blue fluid seemed to steady him slightly, but his hands were still shaking as he set the container down. The council members waited patiently, though many of them looked uncomfortable with what they had heard so far. The space battle was only the beginning of our nightmare, Kethvar continued, his voice growing stronger. After losing half our fleet to human tactics we could not understand, High Command ordered a ground invasion of their colony on the red planet they called Mars. The logic seemed sound at the time. Humans might be clever in space combat, but ground warfare was different. We had superior numbers, better armor, and weapons that could level entire cities. The commander's scales shifted to a dull gray color, showing his deep exhaustion. I was assigned to lead the third assault wave, commanding 5,000 of our finest soldiers. Our intelligence report said the Mars colony was defended by only 800 human Marines led by a colonel named Amy Patterson. The humans had basic kinetic rifles, some explosive devices, and simple vehicles. Against our plasma weapons and powered armor, they should have been helpless. The colony itself was built into a series of underground tunnels and surface domes connected by sealed walkways. Our battle computers calculated that we could capture the entire facility within 6 hours. The plan was to surround the colony, demand surrender, and then occupy it with minimal casualties on both sides. Kethvar closed his large black eyes and took a deep breath. We learned our first lesson about human ground combat before we even landed our troops. As our dropships approached the surface, the humans did not fire anti-aircraft weapons at us. Instead, they waited until we were committed to landing zones and then triggered explosive charges they had planted under the ground. 3 of our dropships were completely destroyed when the surface beneath them collapsed into hidden chambers filled with explosives. The humans had spent weeks preparing for our arrival, turning their own colony into a giant trap. They were willing to damage their own buildings and equipment if it meant killing more of our soldiers. The commander's voice became distant and haunted. The surviving dropships landed successfully, and we began our assault. Colonel Patterson sent us a message before the fighting started. She said, "Welcome to Mars, boys. Hope you brought extra ammunition, because we plan to make you use every round." Her tone was almost cheerful, like she was inviting us to a celebration instead of a battle. Our first mistake was assuming that humans would fight like other species. We had conquered. Most civilized races use organized formations, clear battle lines, and predictable tactics. They fight to control key positions and achieve strategic objectives. Humans fight like a pack of wild animals that have learned to use technology. Kethver's 4 hands clenched into fists as he remembered what happened next. Instead of meeting US in open combat, the humans disappeared into their tunnel system like ghosts. We would advance on a position, find it empty, and then discover that the humans had moved behind us while we were not looking. They used maintenance shafts, ventilation systems, and hidden passages that did not appear on any of our maps. Sergeant Ryan Burke led a squad of only 12 human soldiers, but they killed more than 60 of our troops in the first day of fighting. Burke's team would appear from nowhere, attack one of our patrols, and then vanish before we could respond. They used our own weapons against us after taking them from fallen soldiers. The commander's scales flickered between gray and red. But what made Burke's attacks truly terrifying was how precise they were. He did not just kill our soldiers randomly. He targeted our communications equipment, our officers, and our medics. Within hours, our remaining forces could not talk to each other, had no leadership, and could not treat their wounded. The humans seemed to know exactly how our military structure worked. They understood that destroying our command network would cause more damage than killing twice as many regular soldiers. Burke's squad turned our own tactics against us, using the same infiltration methods we had used on other worlds. Kethver stopped talking and stared at his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. But the moment that truly broke our understanding of human warfare came on the second day. Private Kelly Shaw, a young human female barely old enough to be a soldier, was wounded and surrounded by 30 of our troops in a damaged section of the colony. Our commander offered her a chance to surrender and receive medical treatment. Shaw's response was to detonate a grenade that killed herself and 6 of our soldiers, but that was not the shocking part. The shocking part was what happened next. The chamber was completely silent as every council member leaned forward to hear what came next. Corporal Danny Price heard the explosion on his radio and realized that Shaw was in trouble. Instead of retreating or waiting for reinforcements, Price led his entire squad in a direct assault on our position. 8 human soldiers charged directly at 30 of our best warriors, screaming and firing their weapons as they ran. Kethver's voice became barely audible. Price's attack should have been suicide. Our troops had superior cover, better weapons, and overwhelming numbers, but the humans did not care about any of that. They cared only about saving their friend, even though she was already dead. Price and his squad killed every one of our soldiers in that position. They used explosives, close combat weapons, and tactics so aggressive that our troops could not respond effectively. When the fighting was over, Price knelt beside Shaw's body and spoke to her like she could still hear him. He promised her that her sacrifice would not be forgotten. The commander's scales turned almost white with remembered shock. This was when I began to understand the most terrifying thing about human military psychology. They do not fight harder when they are winning. They fight harder when they are losing. The death of their friends does not make them afraid. It makes them angry. In every other species I had encountered, soldiers become more cautious when their comrades die. They start thinking about survival and retreat. Humans do the opposite. The more of them you kill, the more determined the survivors become. It is like they turn grief into a weapon. Kethver looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many council members as possible. Our intelligence had completely failed to understand this aspect of human nature. We had planned for an enemy that would become demoralized after taking casualties. Instead, we faced an enemy that became more dangerous with every friend they lost. Colonel Patterson understood this psychology and used it to maximum effect. She would deliberately put small groups of her soldiers in dangerous positions, knowing that we would kill some of them. But when we did, the surviving humans would become so enraged that they would attack us with suicidal determination. It was like fighting an enemy that could turn our victories into defeats. Every time we thought we had gained an advantage, the humans would respond with tactics so brutal and desperate that we would lose more soldiers than we had killed. The commander's voice became hollow and distant. By the third day of fighting, our 5,000 soldiers had been reduced to less than 2,000. We controlled most of the surface installations, but the humans still held the underground tunnel network. Patterson sent us one final message before the last phase of the battle. She said, "You came here thinking you were fighting soldiers. You were wrong. You are fighting parents, children, brothers, and sisters. We are not just defending a military position. We are defending our home. And we will never stop fighting as long as any of us are still breathing." Kethver's scales turned completely black as he finished recounting the ground battle. That was when I realized that we had not invaded a military colony. We had attacked a community of humans who saw each other as family. And families, as any human will tell you, do not surrender when their children are threatened. They fight until either the threat is eliminated or they are all dead. Kethver's breathing became labored as he prepared to tell the council about the most horrifying discovery of the entire war. His purple scales had turned almost black, and several of his forearms were trembling uncontrollably. The memory of what the humans had accomplished in such a short time still filled him with terror. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible," Kethver began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I swear by the sacred moons of Zephyr that every word is true. After 3 weeks of fighting, we thought we understood human capabilities. We had seen their brutal tactics, their pack-hunting behavior, and their willingness to die for each other. But we had not yet discovered their most dangerous trait." The commander paused and looked around the chamber. Every alien being present was focused entirely on his words, their various forms of breathing creating a soft symphony of anticipation. Humans adapt, not just to new situations or different environments, but to their enemies. They study everything about the forces they fight against, and then they change themselves to become more effective killers. In 3 weeks of combat, they learned more about Dominion technology than our own engineers had discovered in decades of research. Kethver's large black eyes grew wider as he remembered the shock of discovery. The first sign of this adaptation came from Dr. Helen Carter, a human engineer working in their underground research facility on Mars. While the battle raged above ground, Carter and her team were dissecting every piece of Dominion equipment they could find. Weapons, armor, communication devices, even pieces of our destroyed ships, but they did not just copy our technology. They improved it. Carter took our plasma weapon designs and made them smaller, more efficient, and more deadly. Within 2 weeks, human soldiers were carrying plasma rifles that could fire twice as fast as our weapons while using half the power. The commander's voice became filled with grudging admiration mixed with terror. "Human engineering philosophy is completely different from ours. We design our technology to be perfect from the beginning, spending years testing and refining each component. Humans build something that works well enough, then they keep making it better while they use it. They turn warfare itself into a testing ground for new weapons." Dr. Carter's team discovered that our plasma weapons relied on a specific type of energy crystal that could be found on only a few worlds. Instead of trying to obtain these crystals, the humans created synthetic alternatives using materials they could produce in large quantities. Within days, they were manufacturing plasma weapons faster than we could replace the ones they destroyed. Kethavar's scales flickered between black and deep red as his emotions shifted. But weapons were only the beginning. Chief Engineer Pete Williams aboard the human ship UES Retribution had been studying our captured vessels, trying to understand how our technology worked. What he discovered changed the entire nature of the war. Williams found that all Dominion ships used the same basic computer systems and communication protocols. Every ship in our fleet was connected to every other ship through a network that allowed us to coordinate our attacks and share information instantly. This network was supposed to be our greatest advantage over primitive human technology. The commander's voice dropped to barely audible levels. Williams turned our greatest strength into our greatest weakness. He discovered that the same communication system that allowed our ships to work together could be used to attack them. By sending the right kind of signal on the right frequency, he could disrupt our computers, jam our weapons, or even take control of our ships. Several council members made shocked sounds in their native languages. The idea of turning an enemy's own technology against them was both brilliant and terrifying. The first time Williams used this technique, we lost 6 ships in less than 10 minutes. Our crews watched helplessly as their own computers began shutting down systems randomly. Weapons would not fire, engines would not respond, and life support systems began failing. Some of our ships even turned their weapons on each other because their computers had been reprogrammed by human signals. Kethavar stopped talking and took several deep breaths before continuing. But the worst was yet to come. Williams had shared his discoveries with other human engineers, and they began developing even more horrifying applications. They turned every communication device, every sensor array, and every computer system into a potential weapon against us. Captain Tony Rivera, commanding a converted human mining ship, used this technology to create what the humans called an electromagnetic pulse attack. Rivera's ship would broadcast a signal that could permanently destroy the electronic systems of any Dominion vessel within a certain range. Ships that were hit by this attack became floating pieces of metal with no power, no weapons, and no life support. The commander's 4 hands began shaking more violently as he remembered the helplessness of watching his own technology turned against him. The humans had found a way to kill us without firing a single shot. They could disable our entire fleet, using nothing but radio signals and mathematics. It was like being attacked by invisible enemies who could reach through our armor and stop our hearts. But Dr. Helen Carter was not finished with her research. Working with a civilian scientist named Dr. Grace Martinez, she made a discovery that ended any hope we had of winning the war. They found a way to disrupt Zephyrian neural networks using modulated sound waves. The chamber erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. The idea of weaponizing brain functions was considered a war crime by most civilized species. Martinez had been studying recordings of our communications, trying to understand how Zephyrian minds processed information differently from human brains. She discovered that our neural systems operated on specific electrical frequencies that could be disrupted by precisely tuned sound waves. Kethavar's voice became hollow and distant. The first test of Martinez's neural disruptor was conducted on Zephyrian prisoners of war. The humans claimed they were trying to develop a non-lethal weapon that would incapacitate enemy soldiers without killing them. But the results were far worse than death. The sound waves did not just knock out our soldiers. They caused permanent brain damage that left survivors unable to think clearly, remember their training, or even recognize their own friends. Some of the affected Zephyrians forgot how to speak or lost the ability to control their own bodies. The commander's scales turned completely white with remembered horror. When I learned about this weapon, I realized that humans had crossed a line that no civilized species should cross. They were not just trying to defeat us in battle. They were trying to destroy our ability to think and reason. They wanted to turn us into mindless creatures who could never threaten them again. But the most terrifying aspect of Martinez's weapon was how quickly the humans could deploy it. Within days of the first successful test, human pilots like Commander Nick Thompson were broadcasting neural disruption signals from their fighter craft. Any Zephyrian ship that came within range would find its crew unable to function effectively. Kethver looked around the chamber, his eyes reflecting a deep exhaustion. That went beyond physical tiredness. This was when I finally understood the true nature of human warfare. They do not just fight to win battles or capture territory, they fight to eliminate threats permanently. When humans decide that something is dangerous to their survival, they will use any method, any technology, and any tactic to make sure that threat can never harm them again. Dr. Carter and her team had spent 3 weeks turning our own technology against us. Dr. Martinez had weaponized the basic functions of our brains. Commander Thompson and his pilots were using these weapons to systematically disable every Dominion ship in their solar system. The humans had not just adapted to our technology, they had evolved beyond it. The commander's voice became barely audible as he finished this part of his testimony. By the 4th week of fighting, we were no longer facing the primitive species we had come to conquer. We were fighting an enemy that understood our technology better than we did, and who had improved it in ways we could never have imagined. The hunters had become the hunted, and there was nothing we could do to stop what was coming next. Kethver's entire body was trembling now as he prepared to tell the council about the final battle. His purple scales had turned completely white with terror, and his 4 arms wrapped around himself as if he was trying to protect against an invisible threat. The memory of humanity's ultimate display of warfare still haunted every moment of his existence. The final battle began when the Dominion sent its last and largest fleet to Earth, Kethver whispered, his voice barely carrying across the silent chamber. High Command could not accept that a primitive species had defeated our forces. They gathered ships from 12 star systems, pulling vessels from every corner of our empire. 3,000 ships, including our most powerful dreadnoughts and our most experienced crews. The commander's large black eyes stared at something beyond. The walls of the chamber, seeing events that had happened cycles ago, but felt like yesterday. The fleet was commanded by Supreme Admiral Kexthan aboard the flagship Dominator, a ship so massive it could destroy entire planets. Our intelligence reported that Earth had only a few hundred defending vessels left after weeks of fighting. Victory seemed certain. But as we approached their home system, we discovered that the humans had prepared for this moment. They had not been hiding and hoping we would go away. They had been planning the most terrifying display of warfare the galaxy had ever seen. Kethver's voice cracked with emotion as he continued. The human defense fleet was commanded by Fleet Admiral Kate Sullivan from a battleship called the UES Indomitable. When our massive armada arrived at Earth, Sullivan sent us a message that I will never forget. She said, "Welcome to our home. You came here to destroy us, but you have made one critical mistake. You have threatened our children. Now you will learn what that means." What we saw next defied everything we thought we knew about military strategy. Every human ship in their solar system, from the largest battleship to the smallest cargo vessel, was moving toward our fleet. But these were not just military ships. The humans had converted their entire civilian space industry into weapons. The commander's scales flickered between white and gray as he remembered the shock of realization. Captain Tony Rivera was commanding what had once been a mining vessel, but the humans had transformed it into something that could fight our best warships. His ship used equipment designed for breaking apart asteroids to launch clouds of metal, debris that confused our sensors and damaged our hull armor. Civilian passenger ships had been turned into carriers for small fighter craft. Cargo haulers were loaded with nuclear missiles. Even scientific research vessels had been equipped with weapons based on the technology Dr. Carter and Dr. Martinez had developed. The humans had turned their entire civilization into a military force. Kethver stopped talking for a moment and closed his eyes as if trying to block out the memory. When he opened them again, they were filled with a terror so deep that several council members moved back in their seats. But the most horrifying sight was not their converted ships. It was their space stations orbiting Earth. Dr. Martinez had somehow turned the planet's communication satellites into weapons. Hundreds of orbital platforms that had once been used for peaceful communication were now broadcasting the neural disruption signals that could destroy Zephyrian minds. Admiral Sullivan had created a defensive network that covered the entire solar system. Any Dominion ship that came within range of Earth would find its crew unable to think clearly or operate their equipment effectively. But this was only the beginning of humanity's final gambit. The commander's voice became hollow and distant. The battle began when Supreme Admiral Kexton ordered our fleet to advance. Our dreadnoughts opened fire with weapons that could melt mountains, but the human ships did not try to avoid our attacks. Instead, they moved closer to us, accepting damage in order to get within range of their own weapons. This was when we learned that humans had spent the past month preparing for a battle they knew they could not win through conventional means. Admiral Sullivan was not trying to defeat our fleet ship by ship. She was planning to eliminate the entire Dominion armada. In one devastating attack, Kethver's four hands clenched into fists as he remembered what happened next. As our ships advanced toward Earth, the humans activated their planet-wide neural disruptor array. The signals were so powerful that they reached across millions of kilometers of space, affecting every Zephyrian mind in the solar system. Our crews began collapsing at their stations, unable to control their own ships. But the neural disruption was not designed to just incapacitate us. Dr. Martinez had discovered that the same frequencies that disrupted our thoughts could also interfere with our advanced computer systems. Every Dominion ship in the fleet found its technology failing simultaneously. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft sounds of various species breathing. Every council member was leaning forward, horrified but unable to look away from Kethver's testimony. Supreme Admiral Kexton tried to order a retreat, but our communication systems were no longer working. Ships that had fought together for decades could not coordinate their movements. Some vessels collided with each other as their navigation systems failed. Others simply drifted helplessly through space as their crews struggled to think clearly enough to operate basic controls. Kethver's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Admiral Sullivan watched our fleet destroy itself and then sent one final message that was broadcast on every frequency our ships could receive. She said, "This is what happens when you threaten humanity. We do not just defend ourselves. We make sure that those who attack us can never threaten anyone ever again." Then she activated the final phase of her plan. The human ships that were still functional began systematically destroying every disabled Dominion vessel. They showed no mercy to crews that could not fight back. They offered no chance for surrender. They simply eliminated every ship that had dared to threaten their world. The commander's scales turned completely black as he reached the climax of his testimony. But Admiral Sullivan was not satisfied with just destroying our fleet. She wanted to send a message that would reach every corner of the Dominion Empire. She ordered her remaining ships to capture several of our vessels instead of destroying them. The humans loaded these captured ships with recording devices and detailed documentation of everything that had happened during the war. Then they sent the ships back toward Dominion space with a message for our government. Kethver looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every council member present. Sullivan's message was simple and terrifying. She said, "Tell your leaders that humanity is now part of the galactic community. We did not ask to be attacked, but we will never forget what you tried to do to us. If any species ever threatens Earth again, we will respond with methods that will make this battle look like a gentle warning." The captured ships reached Dominion space 3 months later. By then, news of our defeat had already spread throughout the Empire. Entire star systems began declaring independence, knowing that the Dominion military could no longer protect them. The government that had ruled for 1,000 years collapsed within a single cycle. The commander's voice became filled with a mixture of fear and awe. But the most terrifying part of Sullivan's message was not her threats of retaliation. It was her promise that humans would continue to evolve their military capabilities. She said that the weapons they had used against us were only the beginning. Human scientists and engineers would keep developing new technologies, new tactics, and new ways to defend their species. Kethver straightened his forearms and looked directly at the council members. That was 5 cycles ago. Since then, human ships have been seen in dozens of star systems, always watching but never attacking unless threatened. They have established diplomatic relations with several species, but they have also made it clear that they remember every enemy they have ever faced. I am here today to warn all of you about what humanity has become. They are no longer the primitive species we tried to conquer. They are now the apex predators of this galaxy. They have proven that they can adapt to any threat, overcome any technology, and defeat any enemy that dares to challenge them. The purple-scaled commander's final words echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. The humans do not just fight wars. They evolve during combat, becoming more dangerous. With every battle they survive, they have joined the galactic community not as subjects or allies, but as the species that every other race should fear. And now that they know we exist, they are watching all of us, waiting to see who will be foolish enough to threaten them. Next. The chamber fell into complete silence as Kethver finished his testimony, leaving only the terrible knowledge that humanity had become something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined.